Good morning, HPC. Let God be true and every man a liar. So says Romans chapter 3, verse 4. And Andrew Wilson uses that verse and the verses that precede it to begin to unpack and explore the faithfulness and truthfulness of our God. Now, I have to confess, he uses what I'm sure was a very clever illustration involving three friends who go to a restaurant and have to pay a bill that they think is for $30 or something. I'm afraid I didn't understand it. I even read the footnote explaining it, and I still didn't understand how on earth it was possible. But I've never got on terribly well with numbers, and I guess that's just my fault. It doesn't change the fact that what Paul is saying and what Andrew Wilson is wanting to underline to us in his book Incomparable is that God can never lie. He can never break his promise. And he's wrestling, Paul, in Romans chapter 3, with the fact that it appears that God has broken his promise. You see, but the fact that some Jews, have rejected Jesus seems to imply that God's promise to Abraham that he would rescue the seed of Abraham, the offspring of Abraham, that promise is in some way not coming true. That God is not keeping his promise, that God is either not able to or not interested in being faithful to what he said. It's no small matter to question the integrity, the faithfulness of our God. In fact, it's an attack right at the heart of what we believe about God as Christians. And faced with this possibility, Paul cries out, faced with the idea that God might be being unfaithful, he cries out, "Not at all!" Or as some other versions have it, "By no means." This cannot be, whatever else may be happening, it cannot be that God is being unfaithful. He cannot be unfaithful. He always, always, always keeps his promises. He always, always, always keeps his word. If he didn't keep his word, then he wouldn't be God. Paul says, let God be true and every man a liar. In other words, if God said one thing and everyone who'd ever been born throughout all of history said that thing was untrue, the person who would be lying would be everyone else, not God. It just couldn't be him. God is so righteous, so faithful, so true that even if experts say he's wrong, then the best we can say is that they haven't understood God correctly. Here's how Andrew Wilson sums up the faithfulness, the truthfulness of the Lord. There is no way under any circumstances, regardless of what anyone or everyone might say or do, that God has done anything wrong, false, misleading, or unfaithful. That's quite a claim. That's quite a statement, isn't it? Just think for a moment about those bits of the Bible that you read and you don't agree with. Those bits of the Bible that you read and you feel uncomfortable about them. Think for a moment about God's command to destroy the Amalekites in the Old Testament. I read that. I find it hard to read. It doesn't actually sit very comfortably with me. Does that mean God was wrong to say what he said? No, no. Let God be true and every man, including Rory's feelings, a liar. How about this one? You'll know this. Many people today say that the Bible's view of the place for sexual relations, which is between a man and a woman in a lifelong commitment of faithful marriage, and that's the only place for it, that view, which used to be seen as slightly twee, slightly antiquated, slightly weird, is now actually evil. And a whole raft of uh, of scientific biological fact or psychological analysis is brought into play to say that view is wrong and evil and repressive and narrow, and everyone should do everything they can to reject it. It's hard for us to argue against the fact that people think what God says in this area is wrong. There's a whole sort of cultural baggage that pushes in behind us, and it's represented in films and books and magazines and newspapers. It's just an assumption that that view is dangerous and wrong. So we need to convince ourselves, along with Paul, let God be true and every man a liar, even in that area. Let me pray that for you today. And please pray that for me today, that we will live convinced, basing our lives on God's faithfulness and his truthfulness, even though everyone else may disagree.